Calm. Would you like to have more calm in your life? Now, I'm not talking about less change, but a new way to deal with the change and turbulence all around us. Specifically, would you like to be able to create deliberate calm, the ability to avoid reacting ineffectively and instead choose a mode of thinking and acting that is most effective in that moment? Well, if your answer is yes, you're in the right place at the right time. Welcome to another live episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast, you could be with us live in the future on your favorite social channel. You can get access to those episodes, know when we're doing them, and therefore interact with us as well, as you will see me doing with some of our live participants today. And you can do that by joining us on our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com LinkedIn. How about that? /LinkedIn. If you do either of those things, you can learn about that and get connected with us for future episodes. Today's episode is brought to you by Remarkable Development Sessions. A Remarkable Development Session is a webinar for a new world. We know that we learn in interaction with others, but in a fractured and increasingly virtual world, the workshop experience has been shifted to a focus on delivering the content, leaving the application to you as an individual. And we think we need to change that. So even if you love learning from webinars, you've probably thought there's got to be a better way to make a webinar better than it is. And if you think that's true and you'd like to join us for what we're doing, just go to kevineikenberry.com/remarkable development to learn more and register for an upcoming session on a valuable skill. And with that out of the way, I'm going to bring in our guest today. There he is, Aaron Smet, who I will introduce to you as he smiles at you all. Aaron counsels leadership teams as they transform their organizations to improve performance, organizational health, speed, and agility. Much of his work focuses on helping large, distributed organizations achieve growth, innovation, productivity, and organizational agility. Aaron, who writes frequently about organizational topics, has published many articles in McKinsey Quarterly and is the co-author of the new book, Deliberate Calm. You heard me use that phrase a minute ago. Deliberate Calm, How to Learn and Lead in a Volatile World. He is a member of the master faculty of the Change Leaders Forum and Organizational Agility Forum at McKinsey. And before he joined McKinsey, he worked at several other consultancies as an individual consultant and served as a research associate at the Institute for Behavioral Resources. He has a PhD in social and organizational psychology from Columbia, where he specialized in organizational dynamics, culture, human resource management, leadership effectiveness, and strategic change. And with that, Aaron, welcome. Glad to have you, sir.
Thank you, Kevin. Glad to be here.
And let's see, we've got people, I won't put them all up, but we've got people from Michigan and Baltimore and Durham and Missouri and Pittsburgh and Long Island and Chandler, Arizona. Hi, Krista. From Indianapolis, right where I am. We got people from overseas as well. We've got people in Canada. Put Alpha up here. We can see that from KSA. We've got, let's see, all sorts of folks here and Washington, D.C. as well. So, Aaron, I'm so glad that you're here. I enjoyed the book. We're going to obviously talk about it some today. But before we dive into that, I'd really like to know sort of what led you to this work. I mean, you didn't wake up when you were 10 and say, hey, I think I'll write a book about learning and leading in a volatile world. So, like, what sort of gets you to this place?
What gets me to this place? I would say it actually started in undergrad. My favorite class in undergrad was social psychology. And I asked my social psychology professor in undergrad, I love this class. What can you do with social psychology? And she said, you can become a professor of social psychology.
You can replace me someday, right?
And I was like, oh. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to dual major in business and psychology. Psychology will be my hobby. And then I'll get a business degree. And so I got a business degree and I got an MBA and I started working. I was like, I actually think this psychology thing could actually be used a lot in business. That's why I went back to school at Columbia. And I've just had a fascination with human behavior from then. And it was really an intellectual curiosity then. It became more of a personal passion as I saw professional and personal challenges of others and experienced them for myself. and realized that maybe I shouldn't just study these things. I should start practicing them.
What a novel idea.
Exactly.
And by the way, if for those of you, if you're here for the first time, I'm going to challenge you to that before we're finished today as well.
Absolutely.
So, so Aaron, you wrote the book with a couple of your colleagues, and so real quickly, what's the big idea of the book?
The big idea of the book is that there's a special set of qualities that allow us to adapt to change better and differently when it matters most. And most of us do not inherently possess those qualities. Our brains are actually wired to do the opposite of what the best thing to do is. But these are things we can learn. While there are a few gifted people who are just blessed with this gift naturally, most of us are not born with it and haven't learned it, but we can learn it. And there's no time like the present to start practicing these things so that the next time some big important situation comes along, the next curveball, the next disruption, the next hard thing, the next setback, that you position yourself to respond calmly and thoughtfully, and to be able to adapt and learn rather than to react in old ways that frankly, if you just paused and thought about it, you would realize probably wouldn't work.
Yeah, that next thing that'll be happening next week or something like that, right? So I'm going to actually read something from the introduction. It's a paradox, I think, and you hinted at it, but I'm just going to read this couple of sentences and then have you comment, maybe add to what you've already said. Um, you write, at the very moment when we most need to break free from our habitual patterns and creatively engage with an unfamiliar, complex, and uncertain situation, and choose a new and innovative response, it is that very unfamiliarity, complexity, and lack of certainty that render us unable to do so.
Yes.
Anything more? I mean, you sort of
Yeah.
hinted at that before, but you want to
So
say,
yeah.
it really
So we
struck
call
me.
this yeah we call this the adaptability paradox, and maybe I'll start with um, what sometimes does work in high stakes situations. So a lot of times when the pressure's on and the stakes are high, we get nervous. We get in our own head. We start having self doubt, and a lot of the remedies for that we've learned apply to only certain situations. They apply to the situation when actually you pretty much know how to do the stuff you need to do. It's just the nervousness that might trip you up. And there's all kind of books, like sports psychology is filled with this stuff,
Right.
right? And it says, look, you know how to do this. You've trained for this. Get out of your own head, ignore the doubts, ignore the nagging concerns, ignore those questions in the back of your head, and just get back to focusing on what you know. And the problem with that is, what happens if what you know isn't the right thing to do and you actually have to learn something? And now all the advice we give people to do when the pressure's on suddenly doesn't work so well, because you're like, wait a minute. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this. Sometimes in sports, if somebody makes a mistake, in tennis, somebody double faults, in American football, somebody throws an interception, they say it's great to have amnesia in that moment. Forget the mistake, get back to what you know. And that's kind of the advice we give people, or sometimes it's even implicit. One of the
Well, but the
things you'll
thing is,
see.
before you go on, let me,
Yeah.
what's going through my head is that, whether it's through the interception, they've missed their last 7 3-point shots, whatever it is, those things are relatively, um, the next one's going to be much like the last one. It's not at all like the situations that we might be facing when the next disruption comes up. Um, that's great advice for the skier and the tennis player and the basketball player and the football player, but not necessarily for us.
Well, that's exactly the point. I mean, normally when we struggle, we either get into a self-doubt spiral or we go back to what we know. And in truly different situations where you have a curveball and you have to adapt and you have to learn and you've got a new, uncertain, disruptive event, neither of those two things works. And we just don't prepare people well. One of the places I first noticed this was in transformations, and I started noticing how many of my clients really embrace this idea of create a burning platform. And I noticed how in some situations it worked really well, and in other situations it didn't work well at all. Not because the burning platform didn't work, but because it didn't lead to the behavior change we wanted. And what I noticed was when you just needed people to brute force try harder at what they already knew, the burning platform was great. When you actually
Especially if
needed
they
someone to learn
already also know where they have to go next.
exactly,
That's the thing. Like
exactly.
if all we want them to do is to jump off the platform, it's one thing, but that's rarely the situation.
Exactly. I mean, if it's like Salesforce, you know how to sell, just go out there and sell more. If you can sell more just trying harder, great. Burning platform, great. But if you actually need somebody to learn a fundamentally new way of thinking and acting, to move in a new place, the burning platform, what I was noticing was just debilitating people's ability to learn. Now, it doesn't have to. Part of this is because we haven't equipped people with the tools. One of the stories we tell in the book that really just exemplifies this so well is the miracle on the Hudson.
It's where you start, actually.
That's where we start, and it exemplifies it so well because everyone else other than Sully did what we would predict most people would do, which is you have a crisis, you have an emergency, you have a high stakes, urgent situation, and you go back to what you know. They have a playbook for when a plane takes off, and shortly after takeoff, there's a bird strike and an engine goes out. There's a playbook for what to do, and everybody was following that playbook. Like, turn around and come back. And Sully had the presence of mind to say, whoa, hold on. Does that playbook apply here? Was
Because we're
that
gonna lose one, we lost.
we lost both. That whole playbook was written around every scenario that had ever happened, which was one engine went out. In this case, both went out, and it was a whole different ballgame. And everyone was they were they're yelling at him saying, "Why aren't you listening to our instructions? You are not following the playbook." And he had the presence of mind to not do what almost all of us would do, which is we would have jerked hard on that playbook that was already written and that we were trained to do. We would have fallen back on our training. And he had the presence of mind saying, the training I received is not relevant for this situation. I need to, on the fly, reinvent a new playbook that might just work. And the learning is two things. One is most of us are not Sullys. We're not going to do that naturally, but we can learn to be. That's the point of the book. You actually, that is a learnable skill that we can practice.
And so I want to make a quick observation. Then I want to take us where you were leading us. And the quick observation is, and in that case, with a pilot, they have more rigorous, complete, and repeated training than most of us have for our roles. So, so that maybe makes it even more impressive. And yet all of us, as you said, tend to want to lean back into whatever the training is, the experience says, et cetera, et cetera. And yet you say that these are learned skills that maybe a few of us might be a little more gifted with them, but they're learned skills. So what are the core elements or the core skills of being able to exhibit deliberate calm?
Well, in the book, we go through quite a few of them. But we really summarize the core skills into three fundamental things, and they are self-awareness and emotional self-regulation, often referred to as emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman wrote a great book about that, and that's really about do I understand myself to know what my habitual tendencies are? If I'm going to guard against the bias of doing what I always do I know what I always do under pressure?
Right.
So I can pay attention. The second is situational awareness. Is this a situation where I'm playing a game that I know well and the rules haven't changed and this is just another 3-pointer that I need to try to make and get out of my own head and ignore those nagging questions? Or am I in an adaptive zone where it's unfamiliar territory? There's something new and different. I probably can't just rely on what I know. And those nagging questions might be breadcrumbs to the right answer. I can't ignore them. So that situational awareness, we refer to it as dual awareness. being able to connect situational awareness with self-awareness and emotional intelligence. And then finally, learning agility, the ability to learn from experience, willingness to apply the lessons you learn, to be open to feedback, both explicit and implicit feedback. And when you put those three things together, the emotional intelligence, the dual awareness that connects my self-awareness with situational awareness, and learning agility, you really get that quality that's solely embodied. And I based on the research we've done, I would have to say very, very few pilots would have been able to do what he did without the training like this. It's very unusual for people to have that set of skills and have the ability and presence of mind in a high stakes, uncertain situation. But we've piloted this training. It really works. Like practicing these things can fundamentally help you the next time one of these big situations comes at you from out of the blue and knocks you over. And one of the things we talk about is resilience is not enough. That's bouncing back to what we know. And it's important when you have a setback to be resilient and to be able to bounce back. But increasingly, we also need to be able to bounce forward into something new.
I want you to everybody. I want you to underline what Aaron just said. So say that again. The difference between resilience and bouncing back.
Resilience is important. When you have a setback or something knocks you over, you need to be able to bounce back. But it's often not enough to bounce back anymore because the thing that knocked you over might have just changed the rules of the game. You have to be able to bounce forward into something new.
So let's just take a simple example. Oh, before I do that, though, I have to go back and say, you know why Sully was prepared? It's because he's a Purdue graduate like me. So I have to, there's got to be a thread in your research about Boilermakers.
Boilermakers all the way.
Just saying. I had to go there. But I think that we could all we've all experienced something in the last 3 years at a global level that relates to what you just said, and that is we sent people home to work from home because of a pandemic, and so many people want to say we got to bring everybody back because that's what we know, and we're still dealing with that need to bounce back as opposed to bouncing forward, if you will.
Exactly. I think the pandemic was, and this is one of the other things I've written about in some of my articles, is there is no going back to pre-pandemic ways of working. It's also not good to stay stuck in pandemic ways of working. So the only option is to come up with new ways.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. We've got a lot of people, and there may be some here who say we need to get back to the way it was, and some people say no one ever needs to come back to work and to the office, I should say. And neither of those are probably exactly correct. Certainly not in the big picture. They might be in a given situation, but they're probably not in the big picture. So we'll kind of get back to that a little bit because you were writing during all the pandemic and that sort of thing. So we can come back to that. But there's a couple other things that really strike me. I mean, we could spend a long time, obviously, talking about the three things you just talked about. But there's a couple of things that I'd like us to talk about for a minute. And one of those is the idea of our personal narrative, because I think that's, you talk about it in the book, and, and I think you title it, What's Your Story? So talk about why that's important in this mix that we're talking about.
Well, one of the things I mentioned about the thing you need to learn about is self-awareness and emotional self-regulation. It's very hard to do that very well if you don't really know yourself. And we can take an MBTI or something like that, but those are very superficial. Those really don't tell you that much about who you really are as a person. Personality is much more complicated than what can register easily on those kinds of tests. Um, and it's very important because it also tends to be the things that most trigger our emotions. So my personal narrative and my identity and how I see myself is fundamental to how I see the world. It's fundamental to what pushes my buttons and
It
triggers.
is how you see the world, as it turns out.
It absolutely is. You can't separate them. So if you don't know your own story, if you don't know your own personal narrative, and if you're like, well, I don't really have a personal narrative, you may not consciously have it, but trust me, you have it. We all do. Every human has a personal narrative about who they are and where they came from and what's important to them. And if you don't know it, you're a little bit flying blind to what might push your buttons, to how you might or might not react to a given situation. And it takes a lot of your personal choice away. You say, well, my normal tendency is to react this way. Do I want to react that way? Yeah, I do. Or actually, no, the normal way I would react here probably isn't that helpful. Maybe I should think about doing something else. It's very hard to be choiceful and discerning of how you want to respond in a situation if you don't know what your natural behavior pattern is in the first place. And that natural behavior pattern is very much informed by our personal narrative.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I want to. I'm kind of picking some spots because I knew Aaron that we couldn't, we can't unpack everything in the book. And I'm talking with Aaron DeSmet, one of the authors of the wonderful new book, Deliberate Calm: How to Learn and Lead in a Volatile World. You need to go get a copy because there's no way we're going to get through all this stuff that's here. So I'm cherry picking a few things, and personal narrative being one of those. Another thing that you talk about is the idea of radical accountability. And there's obviously a thread between the things I'm asking and the things we're talking about here. But talk about what you mean by that, because accountability is one of those words that a lot of people have, well, let's just say, a personal narrative about.
One of the things that we try to do here is say, when new things come at us, we often respond with what we know. And when it doesn't work, we blame. It's very natural to just blame the world, blame the situation, blame other people. Why didn't they? They should have. My boss won't let me. Those leaders just don't get it. And you give away all your power when you do that. When you say it's everyone else's fault, you sort of give away your power to influence and change things. And radical accountability eventually gets to helping hold other people accountable and helping them hold themselves accountable. But it starts with myself. How am I going to hold myself accountable? And hold myself accountable not in a way that's self-judgmental, where I feel terrible about myself with guilt and shame and what a terrible person I am because I didn't do good enough. It's not about I'm not good enough and I failed. That's not what we mean by radical accountability. We mean it in a very positive, empowering way. How do we hold ourselves accountable? And when things don't go the way we wish they would have gone, when we think about our intentions, when we think about what did this situation call for and did I respond in the best way, that we learn from it. And for us, the authors of the book, the radical accountability is really fundamental to learning,
Otherwise,
adapting.
why would I? It's nothing I can do. Not me, somebody else. I don't need to learn anything. The narrative says, and my story says, my perspective, my lens says, I don't have to do anything. Like, I don't like this, but nothing for me to do. It's like the weather.
Exactly right.
Better next time.
Well, sometimes when I meet people and I tell them what I do, and I tell them I'm a psychologist and I help people change, boy, we need you in my organization. I'm like, you do?
Well,
really?
I'm not a psychologist, but I've never heard that. Never, Aaron. My
then,
boss needs to be in your class. That's what I hear.
But it's not me. No, other people need you in my organization. I don't need you. It's all these other people. If you could come change all these other people, and that's where everyone starts. One of the things that I do with my clients is we talk about change. To senior leaders, I go and say, okay, the most important thing is role modeling. You got to role model the new behavior. And one of the things we found this through experience and quite a bit of research, the senior leaders, most of the time when change doesn't happen, it's because the senior leaders did not role model it. And for years, I've had colleagues along with me saying, is it because they don't want to? Is it a will, a motivation problem? Or is it because they can't? It's a skill problem. And we kept trying to answer it, and it turns out it's neither. It's not that they're not motivated to role model the new behavior. It's not that they're not able from a capability and capacity standpoint. It's because they actually think they already are doing it.
Yeah.
They're just not self-aware.
Yeah.
They're like, but I do that. I hold people. It's like, there's no accountability in this organization. I hold people accountable. I mean, Bob has been blowing it for years. I just fired Bob. I'm like, well, what? And you did that visibly to the organization? They all know Bob's leaving. And why did you tell them Bob's leaving? Well, he retired and we gave him a big celebration for how great he is. Well, and so he retired, he got a nice big package. Yeah. Like, well, wouldn't everybody want that? Like, what?
Sounds like a pretty good process.
I mean, that's not role modeling the behavior you just said you wanted to do. And sometimes it doesn't occur to them like, oh, I get it. But it takes a while for people to kind of see that they need to change. So the radical accountability is, how do I start with me and learn and adapt and hold myself not to a bar of what somebody else expects of me, but from what I expect and want for myself.
Yeah, and you just said another word that you and I'm confident, although we have just met, that you and I could have a long conversation about. It's that word expect, expectations, internal as well as with our teams. Another place that leaders often mess up. We kind of got at this a little bit now. There's a chapter near the end about sort of creating deliberately calm teams. Like obviously role modeling is a piece of this for us as leaders. What else would you say about how we can use these ideas to help our teams?
One of the things that happens on leadership teams that have a lot of responsibility, it could be a for-profit corporation, it could almost anything where you just feel like what you're doing is important and you really want to do a good job and it's not easy and you're all committed. Along with that comes emotional investment. And as soon as people are really emotionally invested in something, it becomes easy to get triggered. It becomes easy to start to bring our biases into the picture, to not be as objective. And by the way, we don't want to get rid of the emotion.
I was going to say, because there's a paradox too, because it's not like we want people to be dehumanized and not have any investment. Like we absolutely want
all those things. We want all those things. But we want to make sure that we're being aware and intentional and thoughtful and not many times. I do this exercise with team. I'll just give you a little illustrative example. I'll say, so when we're having one of these heated discussions or debates, or there's conflict under the surface and you start feeling yourself feeling irritated or annoyed or frustrated, what's one of those things that pushes your buttons? And we'll go through and we'll have write down what pushes your buttons. I'm like, great. And when your buttons get pushed, how do you tend to respond? How do you react? And they'll say, how do they think? How do they feel? And what would someone else see you doing? And how might they interpret that? And then suddenly you realize that what do they see you doing and how might they interpret that is often a trigger of one of the other team members.
And so we spiral.
And then you just spiral. The whole team, there's a domino effect. It's like pretty soon the whole team is in a reactive, frustrated, irritated, biased, sort of blinders on, tunnel vision. And they don't realize, and again, going back to radical accountability, they don't realize that they're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Every time it happens, they're like, oh, here's this team goes again. But you're part of the team. You're doing it too. And they're not aware. The one thing they can control, their own behavior, is the one thing they're not looking at.
Yeah. That's really good. Aaron, we're almost done. There's several, I got 100 more questions I'd love for us to talk about, but a wise person long ago, when I finished one of my books after it came out, like where you are now, asked me this question. And every once in a while I ask someone, and I feel like you're a person I want to ask. So what have you learned since you finished the book that you now kind of wish was in the book?
So there's two directions I could go in. One is a very personal kind of life experience direction. that story might take too long. So I'm going to take the nerdy research academic
That's okay.
just
That's
because
okay.
it's shorter. I read a piece of research, a really interesting piece of research that just recently published. And what it said was, if you really want to be creative and innovative, it's super helpful to have a high degree of emotion. Very interesting. Low emotion, low affect is not very conducive to creativity. But it can't be distressing or negative emotion.
Positive emotion.
It's got to be positive emotion. It's got to be optimism, hope, joy, excitement in a positive way, those kinds of things.
Gratitude, those sorts of things.
Gratitude, yeah. And then it said, if you are experiencing distressing emotion, that is crippling of creativity. But this was the thing that I found even more interesting. The typical strategies for coping with distressing emotion, which is to ignore or distract, or to suppress, to just stuff it. Those two things are actually even more destructive to creativity than just being in the distressed emotional state. That being in a distressed emotional state is bad. Distracting or suppressing is even worse. Some people, well, what do you do when something bad happens? And this goes back to, you have to be able to channel that. And they talk about the power of what in the academic literature is called cognitive reappraisal, which is essentially, how can I feel my feeling, process it, and then channel it by reframing the situation. That and it seems very Pollyanna. How can I take this crisis and see it as an opportunity? But actually, that's what you have to do. That is what you have to
Because
do.
otherwise you're stuck in the crisis. And that takes us almost full circle back to the whole point of the book. And so I guess we both sort of hinted at it. So one more question before we go into our final couple of more personal questions. And that is, so we've all sort of lived through this crisis, this pandemic thing. And you said, and I agree with you, we can't just try to go back, can't go back. That genie's out of the bottle. What messages do you have for leaders now, given what we've been through? Like, how can we use that crisis now largely in the rearview mirror as an opportunity for us moving forward?
So I think there's two things. One of the most important ones I've already mentioned, which is we have to see this as an opportunity. But the other thing that I think is really important is we have to allow ourselves to grieve what was lost. Grieving, we often associate it with the death of a loved one, but it's actually the loss of anything cherished, anything we feel emotional connection to. And people can feel emotional connection to pets, to places, to events, to experiences. And
Places, including offices, by the way.
exactly. And I think we have a collective unaddressed grieving that we haven't processed yet. And part of the let's get it back to the way it was is subconsciously people aren't willing to grieve.
Yeah.
When you think about the Kubler-Ross model of grieving that starts with denial. I mean, that's the denial. If you think we're going back to what we had before, you are in denial. And the only way to get through to acceptance is to allow yourself to feel the sadness and the grieving of, I really liked those things. I mean, I really liked them. I didn't talk about how much I liked that, but I liked it. And that might be gone. It might be gone, but I can create something new. And the new thing doesn't have to be the old thing. And it doesn't have to be everybody works from home all the time and never interacts in person. It's neither of those. It's new. And we're going to have to discover it and live into something that we've never experienced before, but it might be great. And we can pivot to hope and optimism if we also allow ourselves to grieve and feel the loss of what was once something we really liked and appreciated, and that might not be there anymore.
I love that line, pivot to hope. I've got a couple more questions before we go. So when you're not reading research, and by the way, that last research you mentioned, if it's easy to get a hold of, if you'd email it to me, we'll put it
I
in the
can
show
email it
notes.
to you. Yep,
Yeah,
I
we'll
will
put,
do it.
get it to us, and we'll get it in the show notes for all of you that are watching, listening to the podcast later. And we'll put it into this event for everyone who's here on the various platforms now live. What do you do for fun, Aaron?
I do several things for fun. One of them is cook. I enjoy cooking usually while listening to jazz. Often Miles Davis. He's my favorite musician.
All right, awesome, very clear, very to the point, and I love that, and I love that we can do two of them at once. So, the only thing you knew I was going to ask you is the next question. That is, what are you reading these days, Aaron? Or something you've read recently?
No. I'll tell you what I'm rereading a book that I recommended to a friend and colleague, and she started reading it, and I was like, that was a good book. So I'm rereading a book by Manfred Ketz de Vries called The Hedgehog Effect, which I highly recommend. It is about teams and teamwork and how to. I often coach executive teams, not the traditional one-on-one coaching, but actually coach the team as a team.
Right.
And this book is just a great resource for anybody who does that work.
It is The Hedgehog Effect. I think you're the first guest that's ever mentioned that, as it turns out. Not that that's good or bad, just is. It is good. If you've been following along and never have heard of that, now you have. And that'll also be in the show notes for you as well. So now the question, Aaron, you've been wanting me to ask, like, where can we learn more? Where can we get the book? Where do you want to point people? Anything
It's
at all you want to tell us?
available you can get it in bookstores. It's available on Amazon. You can get it on Audible, the audiobook. So yeah, there's a number of places you can get it. Just look it up or go to Amazon.
Deliberate Calm, How to Learn and Lead in a Volatile World. That's the things we've been talking about for the last few minutes. And now the question that I have for all of the rest of you, Aaron's off of the hot seat. The question now is, now what? What are you going to do? What action are you going to take? Because if you don't take some action from this, if you don't think about some of the things that we've talked about and do more than just think about them, but act on them, whether it's for you, whether it's with your team, whether it's getting a copy of the book and starting there, wherever it might be, maybe it's rethinking how you use the burning platform as a metaphor for change. Maybe it's thinking differently about your emotional intelligence or self-awareness. Maybe it's, I don't know what it is. Those are just a few of the notes that I wrote down. Maybe it's, I'm going to work on being more choiceful, which is one of the things that I wrote down. Whatever it is, none of this matters, having been here, as much as you might have enjoyed it, unless you take some action. So I want to thank you again, Aaron, for being here. It was a pleasure to have you and to share some time talking about these important ideas. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure.
And everybody else, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll take action, and I hope you'll be back next week, same time, for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Oh, tell a friend, invite them to join you as well. Talk to you later.